Hi everyone, I'm looking forward to kicking off this year's mid-year LDJC. The purpose of this video is essentially threefold. We're going to start by recapping the purpose of the LDJC and remind ourselves of where it fits into the larger LDJ framework. We're then going to give you an overview on just some of the key changes we've made to the tool since the last year for those of you who've done or used the tool before. And then finally, we're going to get a sneak peek into the tool itself and try and focus on just how, as team members, we can best prepare for the conversation in order to then be able to maximize the conversation itself. So let's start off with just focusing on performance management at Teach for India and what the real aim or purpose of that is. I think just broadly to start with the leadership development journey framework itself, the idea was to foster a culture of continuous learning and development. And so the framework itself aimed to provide our staff members with some sort of direction to be able to shape your own journey by constantly rooting yourself in our CSIL framework, um, while obviously constantly anchoring in our core values. And so if you look at the screen right now, you will notice that the framework actually begins all the way at goal setting and ends at our end of year LDJC conversation. But there are many key components in between that allow us to lead to get to that final spot. And so currently we're kind of exactly midway, where we're ideally building off of previous conversations you've had on goal setting. For those of you who joined this year, you might have had a probationary conversation, a 2x2. Some teams do a mini LDJC of sorts earlier in the year. And very importantly, it ideally is building on all those ongoing weekly check ins that you've been having with your manager, right? So that's kind of where we are in terms of where this fits into the larger framework. But this conversation itself really aims to do two things. One, to evaluate, right? To evaluate what your contribution has been thus far, or how you're performing overall, what your progress to your goals actually are. And then two, and importantly, once you and your manager have collectively established what that performance is looking like, to be able to use this as a tool for your own development, so that you can actually think about what it's going to take to both build on your strengths and create more spaces to be able to be your best self, as well as reflect and increase effectiveness in areas that would allow you to really unleash your fullest potential towards meeting those goals. So, quick recap: foster a culture of continuous learning and development. This is a midway point. Ideally, you're not looking at this conversation in isolation, but are actually using it as a synthesis or an amalgamation of multiple conversations that you've had with both your team as well as your manager over the past 6 months. And then, importantly, it's doing two things. You're evaluating what your progress to goals have been thus far, and then thinking about how can you continuously grow and develop in your own role as you work towards these ambitious goals. Yeah. So let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about the key shifts from last year. Three key shifts you need to keep in mind. The first one is just the questions itself. So one of the big pieces we picked up based on feedback that many of you have given us from the past is, how can we make this more user friendly? How can we make it more effective? And so you'll notice a couple of things. One is we've tried to delete all of the redundant questions. We got feedback that some of the questions were repetitive, or they didn't really fit into the flow of the conversation. So we've tried to delete those, right? So one is you'll see a bunch of deleted questions. The second thing you'll see is a bunch of reworded or adapted questions. Again, this is taking a lot of your feedback into account. So, some folks shared that the questions were too pointed, others shared that they were very broad. So, we've tried to use all this feedback, put it together, and reword the questions, keeping the spirit of the tool in mind. And then finally, we've added a question or two here or there to make it a little bit more effective, right? So, holistically, one big shift you will see is just questions either deleted, adapted, or added to make this more user friendly for you. The second big shift you will see is peer feedback. Just given Teach for India's focus on the collective, given how much we all work in groups and teams and are encouraged to work with peers on projects, it seemed like there was a missing element of being able to really understand from our peers and others as well, just in terms of how we actually are both contributing as well as just what our strengths and growth areas are. And so this year, the tool uh, tries to do or begins to do the job of collecting feedback from three other people. We're calling it peer feedback, but really it's three other people other than your manager who you work with closely in some capacity or the other. And that will get automatically integrated into the tool so that when you actually have that LDJC conversation with your manager, you're able to look at your performance more holistically, as well as think about both your strengths and AODs more holistically. So hopefully that's something that many of you are excited about. And then the last thing you'll see is just a space to give us feedback. So as a national HR team, we realized that other than the EFR, we don't really have a space or a structured space to receive feedback from you. And just given how much we value constructive feedback as a sign of just care and to help us grow, we've created a section which will only be visible to you and to national HR for you to be able to share just what's working, what do you want us to continue doing, as well as what are focus areas that we might need to think of. So your manager, your vertical head, others, nobody's really going to have access to that. So it's a semi-anonymous type of feedback, which is coming straight to HR, which we can then pull trends from and think about what our priorities need to be and kind of assess the overall health of the organization itself. So that's kind of where we are in terms of just the key shifts from last year. Questions, peer feedback, as well as a space for you to give us feedback. All right, so now we're going to shift gears and dive into the tool itself. When you click on the actual link to take you to the LDJC, you'll arrive at this landing page called Staff Leadership Development Journey. All you need to do is click here saying sign in with Google, click your Teach for India staff ID, and it's going to bring you to your main home page. For those of you who are managers, you'll see your team members, LDJCs on one side, on the right hand side, and your own LDJC on the left hand side. And what you need to do is click on My LDJC, which will bring you to the main LDJC landing page. Now over here, there are a bunch of different tabs and sections, and what we're going to do now is just navigate the entire system by understanding what each of the tabs has, as well as what you can do to best prepare for your conversation. So I'm going to start with the first tab called Educational Equity. The idea of this space is to start the reflective process in a more zoomed out manner, right? So here you're really thinking about what is your evolving understanding of your own commitment towards educational equity. You might think about why you chose to start doing this work, what got you interested in the sector, or how that understanding has changed or evolved through your time at Teach for India or even just in the sector, and kind of pushing yourself to think about where you are today on the path to that kind of journey. And so you're starting off pretty broad. After you've typed in your reflections or your response here in this bucket, don't forget to save as a draft just so that you're not losing anything because of internet failure, poor connectivity. Yeah. We're now going to move on to the next tab called contribution. And this essentially is your main tab that anchors in the very first part of the LDJ framework, which is your goal setting, right? So your core contribution here is really the goals that you set along with your manager or your larger team at the beginning of the year. And it's pretty simple. You're going to click on add goal and essentially type your goal here. Here you might put down a sentence or two on just the purpose of the goal. So why was this goal important to begin with? What is the specific measure that you're using? If you're a recruiter, you might say number of applications. And then here you're essentially going to now use this space to reflect on what are the specific inputs, actions, or mindsets, skills that have led you to reaching where you are, as well as an assessment of where you really are, right? So you might say, I received 75 applications against a goal of 100. And then you might put down just specific things that led to that, or specific mindsets you operated with, and just how you're feeling overall about the goal, right? So you're synthesizing your progress to this goal, and then picking one of these ratings that will help you best identify how far you've come towards that. You can then continue to add goals as per however many goals you've set for yourselves. This will differ for each individual. If you added one too many, you can go ahead and delete a goal, and that's basically this section. Your manager, in their own view, will essentially be able to do just like you did the self-reflection. They'll be able to do a manager reflection and then give you a rating basis their understanding of your progress to that goal. Yeah. So, couple of things to remember about the core contribution section. These are the goals that you set at the beginning of the year. They should be SMART goals. You can add as many as you need to by clicking the add goal function and delete if you added one too many. Yeah. I'm going to move on and move to the next section, which is your broader contribution. These are essentially items that you've picked on either early in the year or as you progress towards this mid-year point, where you've taken on additional things beyond the core goals that were expected of you. And this is really a space just to reflect on what you were working towards and how you did, in terms of your input and actions towards meeting that goal. So, for example, at the beginning of the year, I might not have known that I had the opportunity to participate in Teach for India's 10-year celebration committee. And I might say, actually, one of the things that I did was Teach for India's 10-year celebration committee. And then I might put down just my overall thoughts and reflections on what I've been able to do so far and what my progress has been towards that. Yeah. So again, the idea of this section is to think about what you've been able to do beyond that you're feeling really good about, really proud of, that might be beyond those core goals that you set for yourself. Yeah. As we keep progressing, the next and actually the only big question in this section asks you to now synthesize everything that you've reflected on in the first section, which is your core contribution, as well as the second section, which is your broader contribution, and to really think about, like, what are you feeling most proud of? What are you feeling like, yeah, this is exactly what I'm feeling good about. I feel like I've been able to have strong impact here. And can you start to synthesize that and articulate like what that feeling is and what's leading to that? And also to think about where have I actually wavered a little bit. I don't think I've been able to make as much progress. I think I could have done a little bit more. I think this could have been slightly better, right? And so this is that the section where you're essentially doing like an overall synthesis by pulling everything together and really having a chance to reflect on how you're feeling about that overall contribution. And then the last question in this section is asking you to pull all of this together now and give yourself some sort of a rating from one, like, I don't think I'm contributing to my goals, to this work, to this movement at all, to five, I'm feeling pretty good about my contributions and where I am today. Yeah. So that's broadly your contribution section, uh, deeply anchored in your goal setting process, also giving you a chance to think where you've contributed beyond your core goals, and then pulling all of that together to really think about what you're proud of, where you feel like you could do a little bit more, or you haven't done enough and you feel like you want to push yourself, and then just giving yourself a chance to put kind of a number to that to before you move on to the next section. Again, don't forget to save as draft before moving on to the next section, which is around support. Yeah. The support tab is pushing you to think about two things. One, just where have you gotten most of your support from? So, what have been your biggest sources of support from both within the organization as well as outside of the organization? And can you think specifically about how each of those support systems have catalyzed your own growth, right? So, these could be people, or they could be other resources, readings, other things in the ecosystem that have actually supported you to be able to learn and grow. And so, what you're going to do over here is really think about what those are and then also write down or reflect on how they've actually contributed to your growth. Yeah. The next question is pushing you to think about how have you contributed back to this larger ecosystem? So, who have you supported, and how do you think you've been able to support those people? And then again, just like you did in the previous tab, you're gonna zoom out and think about support as a whole and think about, one, I'm not feeling supported at all. I don't think I'm getting what I need. To five, I'm feeling like I'm in a pretty good place in terms of support. I think I'm getting the support I need to be able to learn, grow, and contribute to the work that I've set out to do. Again, you're going to hit save as draft so that you don't lose anything. And then we're going to move on to the next tab, which is inspiration. And here you're really going to think about what your why is. Like, what are those things that are reminding you day in and day out that this is why you do what you do? What's refueling your purpose? So, again, the reason that this tool is pushing you to list down sources of inspiration or sources of support is really to help you be more intentional about your ability to actually put yourself in situations or in positions where in a position where you're actually able to best leverage that in your day to day, right? So think about what inspires you every week, every month, every quarter, and list that down and talk about how it's doing that effectively. So, for example, I might say, like visiting a classroom and really seeing a fellow who I've selected, do magic in that classroom refuels my purpose and reminds me of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I might say, actually spending time with kids on MUN practice every Saturday is refueling my purpose. And it could look very different for different people. And so the idea here is to think about yourself, what's refueling your purpose, and then ideally pushing you to think about how you can put yourself in a situation to be able to access or expose yourself to this more regularly so that you can keep yourself inspired. Yeah. Like with the other two sections, you're gonna rate yourself from 1, I'm not feeling inspired at all, I'm not feeling connected to my purpose at all, to 5, I'm feeling pretty good about just the inspiration that I get, and feeling very inspired doing the work that I do with the people that I do. Don't forget to hit save. And then we're going to move on to the next section, which is learning. I'm quite excited about this section because, again, this section is pushing us to think about just what are the different experiences, opportunities, reading, people that I've been able to learn from the most. This will vary massively from person to person because each of us have very different learning styles. And so, again, the idea is to put down just where you think you've gotten most of your learning from and how you think that's led to your own growth. Um, and then you're going to put down just what you think you've learned. So, this is the first section is more like what have been the sources of my learning and how has that led to my growth. And then the second section is asking you a little bit more about what you've learned. Yeah. What you've learned would actually mean I learned how to, I don't know, use a new sum function on Excel, which has just made me that much more efficient, which has allowed me to grow in X, Y, and Z manner. Right. And so, first section is talking about what the sources have been. The second section is talking about what you've actually learned to be able to help you separate those two to understand just what you can be leveraging moving forward in the next 6 months in order to continue to push your learning and growth. Like the other two sections or other three sections now, you'll again rate yourself from 1, I don't feel like I'm learning and growing in this role at all, to 5, I feel like my learning has been pretty good, feeling really good about it and is on point. Again, you'll hit save and move on to the next tab, which is peer feedback. Just given our focus on the collective, this is an opportunity for you to get feedback from 3 people other than your manager who you work really closely with. Now, it's completely up to you who you would like to send this link to, but you must pick 3 people, no more, no less. And these could be anyone from either the people you manage, or to a peer who you work very closely with, or to a project group that you're a part of. So you can really send it to anyone. I strongly recommend picking 3 different folks, just so that it gives you a holistic, more of a 360 degree view on your overall performance and contribution. We're just going to quickly open this link so that you have an idea of what kind of feedback you're going to receive. So essentially, this person's going to put in their email address, their relationship to you, whether you're a peer, a manager, a subordinate, etc. And then they're going to have a chance to give you an overall rating on how they view your contribution to whatever work that you do with them. For example, if you're a program manager who's given this link to another program manager, they may actually rate you on your contribution to the program manager community that you both are a part of. If you're sending this to somebody who you manage, they might be talking about what your contribution is to the vertical or the team. If you're sending this to a project group that you're part of, or let's say, for example, Teach for India's data management community, they might say this has been your contribution to that larger community, right? So really, this is your peers' chance to give you a rating from 1 to 5. 1 being this person doesn't really contribute to our collective work at all, to 5 being, this person's contribution is massively valuable and in a great place. They'll then have a chance to pick your top 2 strengths and your top 2 AODs. And then they'll have an open-ended box to really put down their synthesis on what your overall strengths, gaps, as well as contribution has looked like. And then they'll go ahead and hit submit. When they hit submit, that response is actually going to show up in your peer feedback tab itself, so that when you and your manager engage in your actual LDJC conversation, it's giving you both an opportunity to both look at your reflections, your manager's reflections, but also these 3 additional people's reflections, so as to have a more holistic lens with which you're looking at your overall performance, as well as how you can learn and grow. Yeah, it's important to keep in mind that this is a unique form for you, and so you'll notice your name in it as well. So it's important that you copy paste the link of your own form and not another generic link. It's also important to keep in mind that the system is only going to allow you to take up to 3 peer responses, and it's going to also not let you submit your form without 3 responses. Yeah, I strongly recommend having a quick conversation with your manager or your skip manager on just who these 3 people could look like, so that you have a well-balanced feedback mechanism in place over here as well. Again, don't forget to hit save before moving to the next tab, which is your manager feedback tab. In this section, you have an opportunity to actually provide your manager with some feedback. And so you'll pick your manager's top 2 strengths, you'll pick your manager's top 2 AODs, and then you'll do a similar overall synthesis and put down your own assessment of how your manager is contributing to your work, your evolving understanding of your relationship with your manager, vis-a-vis progress to the shared goal that you all are working towards. Again, you'll hit save just so that you don't lose that. And you'll notice the bottom half of this section is a place where your manager will have an opportunity to give you feedback. So this is very similar to the overall 2x2, but your manager will have an opportunity to give you feedback in terms of your overall contribution to the wider team, 2 of your strengths, 2 of your growth areas, and an overall synthesis. You'll hit save and then finally move to the last tab, which is an overall synthesis tab. There are actually 3 sections to this tab. The first one focuses on just, again, it's zooming us out a little bit and focusing on values. So one is you'll just have a chance, like you have in previous LDJCs, to pick the top 3 things you value the most. It'll give you a chance to talk about what value you resonate with the most, as well as what value you struggle with the most. Yeah. The next section will give you an overall summary once everyone has filled out their different sections on just what your average peer rating is. If you remember in the peer feedback form, they had a chance to give you an overall score. So over here, it's going to basically give you the average score. It'll auto populate. You don't need to do anything. If you remember in the manager section, your manager gave you an overall score. So it'll pull that score over here. And then over here, it's essentially going to pull out the overall ratings that you gave yourself in each of the four CSIL sections. If you remember, I mentioned one of the key changes that we made this year was to give you an opportunity to provide the organization with feedback, just given how much we value feedback as well as, how much it reflects your care for the organization and this work. And so this is really your chance to put down, very importantly, what's working. Like, what do you want to make sure that we continue to do well? And then also just any other thoughts or feedback that you have. Um, Important to keep in mind, no one will have access to this one section, this one question, other than our national HR team. So your manager, vertical head, team members, no one will really have access to this. It's more a chance for national HR to be able to drop trends and patterns, to think about what we need to do better, or to be able to facilitate growth, learning, and development in our larger community. Yeah. And then basically, again, you're going to hit save draft, and the rest of this is what you're going to do either during the conversation or after the conversation, right? So, during the conversation, or rather at the end of the conversation, both you as well as your manager will give you an overall rating. And then at the end of the conversation, you'll close out and then you will put down just your overall synthesis and next steps based on the conversation. After all of this is done, you'll go ahead and hit submit and submit your form, which will then reflect on our HR portal. I hope this video has given you a good sense of just what each of the sections are, what they look like, as well as how you can maximize your pre-work to really use this tool to reflect and synthesize everything that's happened over the last 6 months. I know there have been a lot of questions about the types of questions that we have, the tediousness of some of it, etc. I do hope that some of the changes we've made have allowed for different styles of learning and addressing things, the more objective drop downs, or to the more holistic, open-ended questions. My big hope for you is that you're able to take the time to push yourself to reflect in advance of the conversation, and that both you and your manager actually read through each other's reflections in advance of the conversation, so that you can focus your conversation on summarizing and then focusing on the future, to really think about how you can best leverage your strengths and develop your growth areas. So good luck, enjoy the process. Pick a time that's suitable to both you and your managers, so that you'll are both in the best mind space to be able to engage in this. And don't hesitate to reach out to your HR representative, your team lead, or just anyone else for support as you go on. Good luck.